Resident Evil is getting another adaptation. What is up, guys? Andy here from Biohazard Declassified, and let's talk about Zach Cregger entering the world of survival horror.
Biohazard.
This article comes courtesy of The Hollywood Reporter and details that Zach Cregger to tackle the Resident Evil reboot, igniting a bidding war. We'll come to the bidding war in just a second. I'm not familiar with Zach's work, but I know he's recently made a film, or last couple of years made a film called The Barbarian. I just want to focus on these two figures though. So budget 4 million, box office 45 million. He's low budget, high output at the box office results, which is very interesting because I think that Resident Evil, let's say that Zach is directing Resident Evil 1, a new Resident Evil 1 film, specifically Resident Evil 1 in the mansion. I think that works better as an independent level budget rather than all singing, all dancing budgets that Paul W.S. Anderson had, and to a lesser extent Johannes Roberts had. I really believe that Resident Evil is an indie movie, B movie, whatever you want to call it, a VHS tape that you'd pick up in a blockbuster, or you'd find on Shudder or something like that, an independent film effectively. It's still going to be produced by Constantine, as it's detailed explicitly in the article. There was a couple of other points I wanted to pick up on. 4 studios are elbowing for the win, among them Warner Brothers, Netflix, according to sources. So interesting stuff. It might not even come to theaters if it goes on Netflix. I don't think they tend to do dual releases. I could be wrong. I think Amazon Prime sometimes do, but we'll see. I'm certainly not. I'm not against doing something like that, or certainly them doing something like that. Constantine, which has held the rights since the 90s, will produce a reboot along with PlayStation Productions. Shay Hatton, who worked on John Wick Chapter 4 and Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead, is co-writing. Okay, it's good to have somebody on that's written a zombie film before. I mean, Resident Evil was a little bit different from Army of the Dead and kind of George A. Romero type storytelling, I would suggest. But as we know, George A. Romero was infamously penned to write and direct the original Resident Evil film that came out in 2002 that Paul W.S. Anderson eventually ended up doing. Make sure you check out the George A. Romero's Resident Evil documentary on Apple TV, Amazon Prime. Cheap plug there, I know, but please check it out. Excellent work by Brandon Salisbury. But going back to the report here, something else that, again, I've picked up on, I think it was just down here, the Resident Evil, I think it might, yeah, here you go. Cregger's take is described by sources as a revamp that will take its title to its horror roots and be faithful to the initial games, which dates back to 1996. This is fantastic news, obviously, but I feel like we have heard this before. We heard this in the build-up to Welcome to Raccoon City. I actually explicitly remember, and I've spoken about this on stream, I explicitly remember Tom Hopper, who played Wesker, saying, man, this really feels like the games. What a complete lie that was. Welcome to Raccoon City, at parts, yes, I suppose you could suggest that there was some really cool set design and some, the costumes looked really, really good. Obviously you had the big rig and the sandwich at the start. Yeah, okay, there were glimpses, references from the game, but it was fan service at best. It would be like a herb in the background or something like that. But it's not. For them to say it's really like the games is disingenuous. And I want to be really, really excited for this. But this is the 4th time that Constantine have reinvented Resident Evil. Like, what is it about Constantine where they feel the need to consistently reinvent Resident Evil? Why can they not just stick with one and so on and so forth? I'm imagining the big answer is they want to retain the rights at all costs. Maybe there's some sort of contractual element where they have to produce a Resident Evil film every so often. Otherwise, they lose the rights. And Welcome to Raccoon City come out in 2021, so it's not out of the realms of possibility. They're on a 5-year agreement. They've got to make a Resident Evil film every 5 years, or they lose the rights. I don't know whether that's the case. I'm not privy to any additional information, but that seems like it may be the case. So I'm not mad. I mean, Resident Evil was Resident Evil. It just gives me a reason to go to the cinema or watch it on Netflix or what have you. I don't want to be gaslighting again into thinking, oh, we've got a horror director on again. Johannes Roberts was a talented horror director. Paul W.S. Anderson made Event Horizon. these two gentlemen are very, very talented, and I respect them for making Resident Evil films, but it just wasn't the Resident Evil films that we wanted. I truly believe the reason why these Resident Evil adaptations are not working is that there are people that are involved in the project, whether that be executives, or maybe even Constantine themselves. It's even referenced in the documentary, the George A. Romero documentary, that George wasn't certain that Constantine fully understood what Resident Evil was. And I fundamentally believe that that is the reason why it's not successful. These people don't understand what Resident Evil is. See, the difference between films and games is films you see, but games you feel. When you play Resident Evil, you feel Resident Evil. And like when we directed the fan film, when we produced the fan film, The Keeper's Diary, A Biohazard Story, we wanted that feeling, the feeling of being in Resident Evil, like the atmosphere, the sounds, the creaky steps, the door openings, that sort of thing. Obviously, I don't expect fucking elongated puzzles or anything like that. Obviously, it's still a film, and for the most part, it's got to appeal to a wider audience. I totally get that, but there has to be a way for the wider audience to like to adapt to Resident Evil rather than Resident Evil adapting to a wider audience, and that's where the accuracy starts getting lost. I think Last of Us was a fantastic example where they took liberties, but it didn't insult the integrity of the source material. I want to be hopeful for this, guys, and as ever, I'll be reporting on it and giving you my extended thoughts every time we get a little trickle of news, but I will be a little bit reluctant to get excited at this stage. It's exciting that Warner Brothers and Netflix are gonna bid out for it. It shows you that the Resident Evil brand is strong, and it is strong. I mean, if we're saying it how it is, the Resident Evil film series is actually insanely profitable. The Anderson films grossed over 1.2 billion at the box office. These are not unsuccessful films. They're just not successful adaptations. I relate this to like Resident Evil 5 and 6, not necessarily being good Resident Evil games, but they are very, very good games. But what do you guys think? Do you think it's time to shut the book on Resident Evil as a film or a series adaptation? Do you think somebody else that's not Constantine Films should maybe pick the rights up to Resident Evil and do it how they see fit? And lastly, if you had the opportunity, you as a producer, for a new Resident Evil film, what director would you appoint? What writer would you appoint? I think if you were going to ask me about my director, I'd probably say James Wan. I think he's a very special director, very accustomed to horror, that kind of... he's worked at an independent level as well. He has that kind of low budget, high box office output, which I think fundamentally is what Resident Evil could be. But let me know your extended thoughts in the chat. Do you think we need to have a new Resident Evil film? Thank you for watching this video. As always, we will catch up with you very, very soon.